what factors do you think generally or even specifically contribute to the compromise of critical thought?
If you live in the West, uh, the main factors are just the environment itself, the culture itself. Uh, there's so many reasons why. I mean, if you could choose almost any point in the history of Western so-called civilization, and you'll find reasons why critical thinking was discouraged or was uh, completely absent from the society, discouraged from the society, and overall prevented. It's a constant, actually, in the West, going back as far as you want to go. You know, they hype themselves up as being, the very logical, rational. You know, the Enlightenment was all about rationality and reason and so on. But this has never been the case. This is completely this is a self-description and false advertising. In the if we were looking at just now, in the modern age, say the 20th century, 21st century, they have a very obvious motive for discouraging or subverting the cultivation of critical thinking. And that's the very simple fact that if the people of the West and America in particular, if they were critical thinkers, then every Western economy would collapse. De facto social order would collapse. The political system would collapse. The way the whole society is managed relies on the population not being critical thinkers. In terms of the economy, mass production is the basis of every industrial economy. And in order for mass production to not result in the production of wasteful surplus of identical standardized goods, then you need to make people make their consumer choices without any hint of critical thought. They need to be impulse driven. They need to buy on impulse, on feeling, on an irrational sense of brand loyalty. You know, all of these things that the advertising industry exists to do. They need to not buy on the basis of what they need and what actually makes sense, what's actually, a sensible, rational purchase. They need to somehow believe that this vast variety of basically completely identical goods, identical products. They need to believe that these products are all unique and special, even though they're actually, interchangeable. And you need them to assign value to some item, some product, some whatever, on factors that have nothing to do with its utility. It has to be how it makes them feel about themselves or what have you. It's not an actually it's not a critical thinking process. So critical thinking would completely destroy the American economy. If the American people were critical thinkers, the economy would collapse. It's the fundamental mission of advertising and marketing. They want to subvert any degree of critical thinking in a shopper, in a consumer. And the whole economy is based on that. The whole economy requires the population to be disoriented and impulsive and feelings driven, not thinking driven. So I mean, if you're in the West, this is all going to affect you. I mean, in the social order, I've talked about before the fact that America and the West generally, but based on my own experience, especially in the West, in America, it's a society of strangers. Uh, Economics has to do with that also. Economics has a great role to play in why America is a society of strangers, and the West generally. Again, because with mass production, industrialization and mass production, that was a sort of a form of monopolization, and that created industrial centers. And you know what I'm talking about. Those industrial centers put people out of jobs in other places, in other parts of the country, in the rural areas and so forth, smaller towns and so on. So the jobs and the availability of jobs were all located wherever there were clusters of factories. So then you had urbanization. You started to have these big cities. And then the phenomenon of internal migration within the United States from outlying areas to the urban industrial centers. And that meant that these were people who were uprooted away from their extended families and so on, strangers living together side by side in tower blocks, and they didn't know each other. That's still the case until now. I mean, you already had in America that the America itself is comprised of foreigners. The entire citizenry is comprised of foreigners and immigrants who have nothing in common. They have no shared heritage. They have no shared history, no shared tradition, no traditional structures, and so on. Structures that, like, back even in Europe, would have been based on some sort of traditional heritage. That's all interrupted when they came to the U.S. So the rules of the society, the rules of those big industrial centers, and then the rules of the country, and the people who make those rules have no grounding, or they didn't arise naturally from a sort of traditional, organic, natural order, but they're sort of elected or appointed or what have you on the basis of some sort of arbitrary popularity, not on experience, not on a track record, not on any connection with the community, with the people, and so on. So none of this actually makes any sense. This isn't historically how societies were supposed to operate or did operate. It makes no sense. It's completely unreasonable and unnatural. It's an unnatural social model. It's a way of trying to manage the society that doesn't make any sense. It's an artificial, manufactured way, but it only makes sense for the people who are in power in that country and in that society, to have the people isolated and atomized and alienated from one another and alone. And they in America, they call this rugged individualism, being independent and all that. But it's all a tactic for making people defenseless, making people helpless, making people lonely and desperate and vulnerable. And this makes them very easy to control. Like in America, you don't run out of things to talk about with regards to why critical thinking isn't in their interests. Like if you just talk about the political realm and the so-called democracy that they have, it's obvious why critical thinking would undermine that system, because they need you to continue believing that you live in a democracy, and that they need you to also believe that democracy is itself the best possible system of government, even though neither of those things is true. Neither of those assertions is actually true. You don't live in a democracy, and democracy is not necessarily the best system possible. It's not necessarily the best system of government. There's so many reasons. The whole society is managed through the infliction, as I've said many, many times, the whole society is managed through the infliction of severe, comprehensive cognitive dissonance, meaning that they need you to believe in a reality that bears no resemblance to the reality that you actually experience and observe in your day-to-day life. Well, obviously, critical thinking would make that a very difficult thing to maintain. That would make it very difficult to maintain the necessary cognitive dissonance that allows the West and American society to perpetuate itself.